Tracy Ellis Ross. And Antonio he had called in and he was having a conversation. The conversation he was having was basically about the masks, the things the things that mask blackness. And I was trying to discuss how there were nobody, like a lot of times I remember when I had this conversation about Obama, the conversation was always, well, Yvette, you're trying to say that he's not black, and that's not true. You're trying to say he's not black. And I've never said that Obama wasn't black. I'm not saying now that Tracy Silverstein is not black. That's not the conversation we're having. The conversation we're having is how black people who have some access to capital are able to somehow present themselves as being, black just like you, in terms of the kind of things that you go through every day, the kind of things that we all deal with every day.
So what does access to capital look like?
It looks white. I mean,
so how about if so the business, to start a business we're reading today, takes $30K, right? So that means you have access to $30K that people will just give you and not mind if it goes south. It's not like $30K if someone's like nest egg, where they're deeply committed to it.
It's like if your mama has saved $30,000 for retirement, like that she is like, my mama could give me $30,000, or it's not like either like we can pool together $30,000. I don't think that's what it looks like. I don't think that's what we're necessarily talking about. And I think that's a misunderstanding. Like, you need somebody who can give you who can give you some money and be okay if you lose it. And then if you don't have that, I mean, and even if you do have that, you hear so many, like if you read a lot of these startup magazines, one of the things they always talk about is, well, I had to forego my salary for a long time. I didn't have any money. I had to actually, my spouse had to pay out a bill, my partners had to pay out a bill because I had to make payroll. And that's the thing that nobody really wants to talk about. That's the conversation that nobody really wants to have. And we keep having this conversation that, that anybody can start a business. It's like anybody can start a business. The first part of it, is capital, and that knocks a lot of us out. But there are other aspects of it as well. And I think that's what we need to pay attention to. And that's why the if you have it, I don't know if you have it still. I mean, I know if we want to play it, we risk some, but I would like to talk about. I think the next time we come on, I think it deserves a greater discussion than we have time to have tonight, because I want to bring the callers on. It deserves a greater discussion than we have time to bring on tonight. But there are a lot of masks that people. The Tracy Silverstein is only one mask. So when you look at her, you think she's black. She's just like me. I'm in the hood. I can make it. But she has a Jewish father who had access to money. She had a mother who was an R&B, icon. Still is. When you look at, there was a great part of the interview, and I think, like I said, since we had technical difficulties tonight, I'm not gonna try to bring up any videos, but right now. But there was a great part of Antonio's video where he asked Professor Darity, like, what do you think about, people, Africans who have come here as immigrants, and how they navigate. And one of the things he said is just like, well, the thing about it is he said, and this is inside information. He said a lot of these admissions officers that I've talked to say that they kind of like African immigrants or immigrants in general because they're more docile. They're not going to be politically active. And I want you to think about what that means in the context of how we got the stuff that we have now. We got affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act and all the good stuff that we got, that was supposed to help black people get a leg up and make us full citizens. Like the stuff that immigrants benefit from now came from activism. And now they're saying, because they're docile, I'm going to accept them in. So it's almost like they're kind of replacing us in a way. They're replacing us, but they wear the mask of blackness, so they look black and everything. So you can say, I have this many, aren't these black people doing great? But you never talk about where they come from, and you never talk about that they're benefiting from a struggle, and they're not struggling. Like, they're benefiting from the struggle of African Americans, but they're being brought in because they don't struggle. So, like, we're supposed to be the beneficiaries of that. And we're not even allowed to kind of be the beneficiaries of that because other people come in, and because they're black, it's like it's okay. And that's one of the things that's so important about this whole conversation is the problem with viewing, and it's something I say all the time, but I'm going to say it until people get it. Like, the problem of viewing our relationships and our allegiances through like skin color and hair texture. Right? So you look at a person who is from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say, like, when you look at this, don't look at this through the prism of this is my ally because they have black skin and they have kinky hair. Let me just ask you, have you ever heard a rich Nigerian talk to a poor Nigerian? Honestly, have you ever heard it? Have you ever heard a rich black South African talk to a poor white? They talk to him just like they talk to him like garbage. Like they talk to him just like you heard white people talking about, you hear white people in slavery talking to black people. That's how they talk to him, like trash. Like, and the best of the best get to come here. Like you're not interacting most often with the African or Nigerian or Ghanaian who came here and was just like, the poorest of the poor. That's probably not who you're interacting with. You're interacting with somebody who came from a different stratosphere, at least middle class, usually a little bit more elite than that. But that's who you're interacting with, right? So I think there are so many layers to this in terms of masking what it means to kind of mask blackness and what it means to kind of, and not even just masking blackness, but African Americanness. So you see all these people, these Ivy League schools, but you don't know there was a study that was like, so many of the black people at Ivy League schools are African Americans. So what does it mean that even though they're not, like, they have your affirmative action slide? And it is your affirmative action slide. I had someone arguing with me on Facebook who I think was Nigerian, was telling me, well, it was not meant for that. Who are you to tell me?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was meant for that.
Talk to the people.
No, it was meant for that. Like, my dad's from Ghana, my mom's from South Carolina. But, like, affirmative action was meant for descendants of slaves who were historically locked out of the economy. So, like, it's not actually, it was meant for that. And the fact that admission officers admit that, they would rather have a black African immigrant rather than a descendant of slave because the immigrant's going to be more docile and less likely to start political activism on campus. Like, that's a shame. That's a problem. And if admissions officers are doing it,
everybody's doing it. Everybody wants the most docile. Everybody wants the most docile representation of blackness. That's what corporations want. That's what employers want. That's what schools want. Everybody wants the most docile representation of blackness.
But the only reason, this is important, the only reason that there are black people there at all is because of our political work.
It's because of yes. And I'm not saying, I know people are going to bring up West Indian, activists and things like that. Don't talk to me about outliers. I know all of it. I know all of the names. I'm not saying that they don't exist. What I'm saying is the majority of black people in this country are descendants of slaves. That doesn't mean descendants of slaves and slave owners, quite frankly. But that doesn't mean nobody is discounting the value of other groups. Nobody's discounting the value of other communities. We're just acknowledging what is. And then to go back to the story of the Nigerian on my page, like, you don't get to tell me, and somebody responded and basically said, listen, it must be nice for you to come from a country where you're not on an everyday basis judged by the color of your skin. You're surrounded by black people. Like, who are you to come here and tell us what affirmative action was meant for? And I think, honestly, for me, it's a level of disrespect. I would never go to Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, anywhere and say, well, this wasn't meant for you. It was actually meant. I wouldn't tell you anything about that. I wouldn't say anything to you about even if I was second generation, I wouldn't say anything to you about the history of this country and all of that. And I certainly wouldn't say that if I just moved here or anything like. I'm not going to do that because I understand my role. But I understand if your heritage in this country goes back 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations, like, you don't, like, who are you to tell me, like, well, it wasn't meant for this? Like, you don't get to do that. Like, it doesn't diminish your role here, but understand that, like, the citizenship of African Americans was purchased by the activism of African Americans, and if you come here later than that, you're a beneficiary of that. But the ancestors of African Americans who were descendants of slaves, have a direct lineage to that, and understand that makes you different. I don't have a direct lineage to, like, the colonialism that existed in so many countries in Africa. I don't. So I can't go there and claim that, and I would never do that. I would never do that to you. I would never go there and claim that because it's not for me to claim. Like, you have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who've heard stories of what happened under colonialism, and if you kick them out, you kick them out. And if and the people who work within that system in activism against colonialism, that is your thing. And I think there has to be a clear demarcation point, because you don't get to walk. Even if you walk into an Irish, even if you walk to an Irish bar, you don't get to go in there and tell Irish people what they should be doing. And and you're Mexican or something. You don't get to do that. But African Americans, we let everybody tell us what our story should be and how we should respond to what happened to us. We responded to what happened to us. We did that. And at some point there's going to have to be some kind of respect and some kind of, you're going to have to be deferential, and we're going to have to talk about who affirmative action was intended for. I said on my Facebook page that the speech about affirmative action that LBJ gave was at Howard University, which is my alma mater, which is historically black college. There's a reason for that. Why are we trying to pretend right now that affirmative action was meant for everybody except for white men? Why are we trying to pretend that? No, this was like so many of these things was just because black people have been oppressed for 200 years. And I had somebody say, well, it's for all people who've been excluded to have their rights. It's for everybody who has been excluded to have their rights. Well, wait a minute. Let's talk about fairness. If black people have been oppressed for hundreds of years in this country, and you just walk the border and you say you're oppressed, do you get the same advantage that I get because you've been excluded for 2 minutes and we've been excluded for hundreds of years in the richest country in the world?
Generational poverty is real.
Generational poverty is real. Crossing the border poverty ain't the same. Now, I'm not saying that what happened to you in terms of your country and America instigating anything. That's not my issue. I don't bear a burden for that. I don't bear any responsibility for that because that same kind of thing happened here to us within the borders of this country. I don't bear any responsibility for that. But the second thing I will say is this, just like I don't bear any responsibility for what happened there, it doesn't mean I don't feel bad about what happened to you. What we're talking about in terms of America and American business is what does America owe African Americans? It's not the same thing that even it owes white women, because white women, even like I've said before, you have access to capital because you sleep with the people who have the capital. The white men have the capital. That's your husband. That's your son. That's your grandfather. That's those people. So we have to understand that, like, this whole thing of just spreading, the Democratic Party has just basically given away our affirmative action, given away the stuff that was meant for African American descendants of slaves to every group imaginable. And so what you have is that you mask the suffering of black people when you bring in others, say, quote unquote, minorities are doing well. Well, African Americans aren't doing well. Don't put me in the boat of a minority. Let's talk about specific groups. Let's talk about Caribbeans. Let's talk about Africans. Let's talk about Latinos, and let's split that up too. Let's talk about Cubans. Don't just put me in a group of minorities. That's a throwaway term. But African Americans have been here. We shouldn't even, like, how do we allow ourselves to be put in the same category with people who might have just gotten here last week or last month? It's insulting to be that group. Well, these are white people and the rest of y'all are minorities. No. And I don't even really want to be called black, because black is everybody. That's black, that's Caribbeans, that's Africans, that's everybody who has skin color and, or texture in their, or like texture in their hair, or curly hair, nappy hair, whatever. I don't know. Descendants of slaves, descendants of American slaves. That's who we are. That's a special, unique category. And I don't think there's anything. I think black people have always kind of, out of this Pan-Africanist ideal, we've kind of shied away from having this conversation. And we think, well, everybody, if he's from Africa, that's the motherland, that's my brother. And the truth of the matter is, that's not how you win. And I don't think anybody who's coming is thinking the same thing, that's not automatically my brother. I think this sort of nostalgic thing.
No, African immigrants do not come here trying to assimilate with a losing team. Oh. That's like, you don't come halfway across the world to, like, go shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm with the poorest of the poor. They came here to make a score. And that's fine for them, but, like, let's not pretend one thing is another. You don't come here to assimilate with a losing team.
No, but we think everybody's our friend. Like, we don't understand. Like, the thing is, like, this is capitalism. And, like, even if I wish it were not, or whatever the case may be, even no matter what you wish, I don't care what you wish for in your head in terms of what this government would be and all of that. Like, until the revolution comes, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to work somewhere. You're going to have to compete with somebody. So how are you just being like, that's my brother? No, that's not. Like, this is a cutthroat thing. Like, capitalism is very cutthroat. It doesn't leave time for you to just, live in, like, this kind of wish fulfillment. You don't have time for that. You have to compete with these people. And I'm just going to be honest. Like, I'm just going to be honest about it. Like, if you're talking about immigration, like, I can't compete with people if they're not here. I know that's me. I know people gonna say, "Oh, Yvette, what's wrong?" But I can't compete with you if you're not here. Like, jobs are flowing. Do you understand how fast jobs are leaving this country? I I saw a thing the other day of, it was a little bartender man serving, it was a little robot bartender serving drinks. That's how fast jobs are leaving. Like, you're not going to have any more jobs. We're headed towards a mechanized economy. And before we get there, though, if you're being outsourced, the jobs are getting outsourced and they're being mechanized. So the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to just say, yes, invite everybody else in, and I want to compete with everybody, and everybody's my brother? If you look like you got a tan, or you like you might have nappy hair, or somebody in your family has nappy hair, you're my brother. This is just silly. So, all right, let's just see if we can take some calls real quick.
Hello?
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 Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hey, yes, this is Brandon calling again.
Hey.
So far you guys have had a pretty good show, and you guys are talking about generational wealth and the lack of it in the Black community. So I just want to make a couple of quick comments real quick. So myself, like I said last week, I have 2 degrees, and I went to school, and back when I went to college, I made a choice either between engineering or the healthcare field. And so I chose to go in the healthcare field because at the time engineering wasn't doing too well because of the dot-com bubble burst. So I did all of that foolishness back in my college days. And when I graduated, I was unemployed for 13 months, like how I said last week. And when I was unemployed, after, technically I did everything correct. I went to school, I had good grades, I had, everything on paper was there, but I wasn't able to get a job for over a year. And during that time, I ended up in my grandparents' house in Liberty City in Miami, wondering what the hell was going on. And it was at that time I started to realize the difference between income and wealth, as you guys are talking about tonight. And so the one thing that I've noticed in the Black community is that Black Americans, they don't know what true wealth is, and they don't know what true income is either. But they definitely don't know what wealth is. And so when you guys speak about wealth, I'm also thinking about not just assets or monetary inheritance, but also like nepotistic wealth. Because living down here in South Florida, what I have seen is that other communities, whether they're native or immigrants, they have systems set in place to actually give each other opportunities to uplift themselves from wherever they are. For example, in South Florida, if you go north of South Beach, you go into Sunny Isles, which is a very heavy